Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another book review on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and today we're taking a look at the UZI Submachine Gun Examined by David Gaboury. This is one of, there have been actually a lot of interesting technical firearms books that have come on the market recently, been published recently, and this is another one of them. And what made this one interesting to me to take a look at was the fact that there's really not much out there written on the Uzi. It's easy to find, little short pamphlets and mostly instructional manuals, but as far as actual historical or mechanical in-depth material, well, there's very little. And the Uzi is a firearm that kind of has led two separate lives. It has an international life of, obviously, its use in Israel, and then its use by a number of other major European military forces, and actually outside of Europe as well. And then it also has its second life on the commercial market here in the United States. And these are two very different stories, because on the military scene, well, the requirements for the gun and what will make it successful and the modifications that are made to it are completely different for the military market and the US commercial market. And one of the really cool things about this book is that Mr. Gaboury does a really good job. He goes into a really extreme amount of detail on both. So in total, the book's right at 300 pages long. It is chock full of photos, although it is all black and white. And it's divided into 5 major sections. So the first one is on the actual development of the Uzi. Second one is on the major versions of it. Third one is international use. Fourth is the Uzi in the United States. And then the fifth is accessories and ephemera related to the Uzi. So a lot of research went into this, as I alluded to, including some things like trips to the actual museums in Israel where a lot of the prototypes are still kept, where the original factory documentation is still kept. So there's a lot of baseline primary source material in here. And the first section in particular is really interesting, well, to me, because it covers the Israeli, not just the development of the Uzi, but what they were looking for, Israel's requirements for a submachine gun in the late 1940s, and their testing of what turned out to be, they tested virtually everything that was on the market at the time. A lot of World War II surplus, but also some guns that had been developed after World War II as well. And why they preferred their designs, and the two designs that they finally came up with, and then the competition between them, which ultimately led to adoption of the Uzi. There's a lot of discussion about how the Uzi was a copy of the Czech SA 23 through 26 series, which isn't actually entirely correct. The Uzi certainly uses some ideas from those guns, but it was an independent design by Uzi Gal. And in fact, when he first started tinkering with firearms, this is some of the story that's recounted here in the book, he wasn't even 20 years old yet. He was 19, tinkering with gun designs, got captured by the British authorities in what was then British Palestine, and ended up spending 2 years in jail for possession of armaments. He was released early, which is kind of a story on its own that's in here, and promptly went right back to working on firearms design and ended up creating the Uzi. And even his very first designs were not that much different than the final product once he understood what the Israeli government was looking for. Anyway, once the Uzi is actually developed and produced in Israel, it then becomes the subject of major manufacturing. And IMI, Israeli manufacturing, decides that it's interested in a foreign market for these guns as well, and manages to first sell them to the Dutch government, which is quite the coup, getting if you think about it, Israel is this little tiny upstart country, literally hasn't been around more than a few years. They've managed to create their own indigenous firearms design and make it successful enough that it's being adopted by an old world European military power. Well done, Uzi Gal. Anyway, the Dutch adopt the gun, and the description, the story of that adoption is in here, as well as the varieties of the gun that the Dutch use. The Germans then adopt it as well, and there's some discussion of the circumstances of the German adoption. And then a number of other worldwide users, from the large like that, the South Africans, the Croatians, the Japanese sort of adapted a version of the Uzi, which is interesting. That was one I wasn't familiar with at all. And then, of course, we have the United States story, where the Uzi has gone through a number of major, life cycles, I suppose you could say. Some of this is based on US law because the implementation of the ban on importation of machine guns, and then the ban on domestic production of machine guns, and then the assault weapons ban, all of these things impacted the manufacture and sale of Uzis in the United States, and they led to some varieties of Uzi manufacture. Probably the most notable being the Uzi carbine, which is the semi-automatic only version that was able to be marketed here in a number of different guises. So the book, Gaboury does a great job. And by the way, I should point out, I believe he is the owner of UZItalk.com, major online forum devoted to the Uzi. He did a great job tracking down the history of all of the major commercial groups that were making and selling Uzis here in the US. And the history of how these guns were manufactured and marketed and modified is excellent. So you have things like, well, traces from the very early importers, and then Action Arms or Action Manufacturing, Group Industries, Vector Arms. These are the major companies that played a role, and there are elements in here like Group Industries decides to stamp out basically 4,000 full auto Uzi receivers and register them as transferable right before the implementation of the Hughes Amendment banning domestic machine gun manufacture. But it takes a long time for those receivers to actually come to market, and they have to be modified in a couple of ways before they do, and all of that is in here. And while you might not think of the Uzi as a gun that has a lot of variety to it, and you'd pretty much be right, you've got the Uzi, the Mini Uzi, and the Micro Uzi, and then a couple of versions of each one in various full semi-selective fire types. Instead, where a normal book would, or a book on a different gun, would talk about a wide variety of, all the different adaptations of the gun, since there isn't that much variety in the Uzi, what Gaboury does here is go into a tremendous level of detail on all of the small modifications. So if you can take pretty much any Uzi on hand and identify every last little minute variation of it through this book. So changes to the parts, changes to manufacturing techniques, changes to semi-auto and full auto fire control groups and bolt designs and striker designs, all of the legal changes that were required over time, as well as things like the implementation of additional safety measures as requested by the Dutch and or German militaries. And then parts manufacture and the interrelations between the different companies making parts. There was a lot of back and forth. IMI sourced its parts from other licensed manufacturers at times. So there's really a tremendous amount of history here. It's not the most engaging book I've ever read. It is something where you will have to actually be interested in the history of the Uzi. It doesn't really draw you in and make you interested in the gun, but if you come into this book curious about its subject matter, it will do a great job of informing you. I don't think there has been much room left for anyone to do a follow-up work on the Uzi after this book. No. It is published by Mowbray, gunandswordcollector.com. I have a link in the description text below where you can pick up a copy. Cover price is $50. If you're interested in the Uzi, it is probably the best $50 you'll spend. If you couldn't care less about the Uzi, well, maybe this isn't a book for you. But if you want to have an all-encompassing firearms reference library, this is definitely a good one to add to it. So thank you for watching. Tune in again next week to another book review here on Forgotten Weapons.